And what I want to do is talk about your platform, the various planks of your platform that you're running on. Shiva, there are roughly 1.2 trillion in student loan debt out there. What innovations can we make to our tertiary education system that would make the pursuit of learning more effective as well as less expensive?
You know, I think it's a good transition from the email story. You see, the invention of email actually tells us a lot about where education and innovation really comes from. You see, my public school system is what really gave me a lot of fundamentals, you know, and my family, frankly. You know, it was family, dedicated public school teachers. I have to tell you, I learned very little, frankly, at MIT. I learned more in my public school systems, and I got to be very honest about that. MIT really got a very smart guy, and they gave me the MIT brand, and that's what most of these institutions do. Through the selection process, they're already getting sort of the creme de la creme, right? And then they put a brand on them. But in my public
years ago, someone said, "Well, our public school education system really exists only to cast a very wide net to find the talent, not necessarily develop."
You know, the 70s were the heyday of still dedicated teachers before, you know, the Department of Education destroyed education in this country in many ways. You know, my chemistry teacher, Mr. Walker, is still alive. I think won one of the best teaching awards in the country. He held 3 jobs. Think about this. He was a teacher, he was a contractor, and he was a carpenter. But he was, wow. I learned so much that I still hold today, or from my algebra teachers, etc. And then I got actual mentorship and apprenticeship training from, you know, NYU, where they had held, where a visionary professor said, let's bring some high school students in. And then from Dr. Michelson in a state university where I got to work. So I got to tell you, I was already a seasoned programmer long before I came to MIT. I remember sitting in on my first MIT computer science class. I thought it was a joke. So what I'm trying to say is that education really comes from fundamentals and actually skills training. I was a skilled software engineer long before I came to MIT. And so my view of education, you know, I went on to get those degrees, but during those 4 degrees, I was always in and out of MIT, starting companies. I decided to get those degrees because I was very cognizant, for a person of color, for a person of my background, that if I wanted to participate in larger dialogue, people would always look at my credentials. So I went and got those more as weapons. But I got to tell you that I was trained, I was making money while at MIT, during MIT, from the training I got from Newark, New Jersey, and my high school system. And that's just a fact. So my view on education is pretty simple. You know, that we don't need to go to these, the educational industrial complex. What we need is to make sure people are getting fundamentals, which can only occur, in my view, in early stages and formative periods in the public school systems. Second, we have to recognize that you have to allow choice. Everyone learns at different levels, and not allowing choice in education is the wrong thing. The second piece of it is we need to really focus on what I call skills-based education. Right? Are you actually learning a skill? Right now, what we have is we have a collusion between the predatory student loan companies and big universities. Universities keep cranking up their salaries.
Right.
Do a massive marketing campaign to convince parents you got to send your kid to college, otherwise he's worthless or he or she's worthless. And so parents are a captive consumer audience. They get the student gets accepted to a college. The student loan, which is unfortunate, it's even called the student loan, because
it's really a form of indentured servitude almost.
Yeah, the loan, the money goes right to the university, so they get free money, and the student is signing papers and can never go bankrupt. Now think about it. If I take a loan from a bank, or you do as a small business person, they always ask our pro forma, what's the projection, and then the bank makes a prudent decision because they know if they invest in you or I, that if we go bankrupt, they're going to lose their money. But the student loan companies do not have that control mechanism. So they're giving out student loans. They know that these students will, as you say, go into indentured servitude. If particularly they're not in a quote unquote business, which means an educational process, that they have no skills. So if you're studying the anthropology of aardvarks or something, that's still being funded, but you may never go anywhere with it. And the student loan companies are essentially in a racket with these, you know, educational institutions. By the way, many of the private ones are essentially large-scale hedge funds like Harvard. Harvard is fundamentally a $40 billion Wall Street hedge fund, which has one end called a university. So this whole thing has become a massive industrial complex to essentially not do education, but to make money and grow these endowments, which essentially pay off the hedge fund managers. You know, last year, Harvard, for example, paid $58 million, I believe, to 6 or 9 guys who run their hedge fund. So that's what's really going on. So we don't really have education anymore. We don't have skills training. That's why, for example, Massachusetts, for every 17 skilled high-tech job openings, only 1 person is skilled. Think about that. So you have jobs, you have resources, but people are not being trained because of this complete delusion that people have been put under. You have to go to this big university, and basically it's a complete racket that's taking place. So I think, first of all, it starts with family and parents recognizing that your kids need to get skills. And the other part of that is we need mentoring programs and apprenticeships. That's where you really learn. You don't really learn a lot, frankly, by going to a university.